Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Yountville Town Council. It is Tuesday, May 5th, 2009, at 6 p.m. For those of you joining us for the very first time in council chambers this evening, you'll find the agenda and the supporting documentation on the wall in the little plastic bins by the door where you walked in, so help yourself to that information. We are being broadcast live on Channel 28, as well as live video streaming. You can pick up our video of tonight or at a later date. It'll be archived for your viewing pleasure. If you go to www.townofyountville.com and click on
Agendas and minutes.
Agendas and Minutes. And this video broadcast, or the live broadcast, will be rebroadcast again Friday at noon. So you'll have many opportunities to view this session again. And one other little housekeeping item before we get started this evening, we would appreciate it if you would turn off your cell phones and pagers while you're in council chambers. Thank you. Would you please call the roll, Town Clerk?
Councilmember Dutton.
Here.
Councilmember Chilton.
Here.
Councilmember Moeller.
Here.
Vice Mayor Dunbar.
Here.
Mayor Sosserman.
Here. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. We have no closed session report this evening. Item 7, adoption of tonight's agenda. Are there any changes or corrections to the agenda this evening?
Mayor, if I may, I would like to continue item 12 to our next council meeting on May 19th. That is the Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act item. I feel like we need a more thorough staff review of this item before we can move it forward.
There's a motion to continue this item to the next council meeting. Can I have a second? I'll second that motion. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Dutton.
No.
Vice Mayor Dunbar.
Yes.
Mayor Sosserman.
Yes.
Councilmember Chilton.
No.
Councilmember Moeller.
No. Okay, that item will remain on the agenda.
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Let the record reflect that there is one no vote on the agenda this evening. Item 8 is public comment. Anyone wishing to comment on anything that is not on tonight's agenda? This is your opportunity. Anyone?
I'd just like to commend the parks guys for the way the parks are looking. They're out there tearing things up today with the tractor. The flowers look great. They've been doing a lot of trimming and pruning, and the parks look great. And I'd just like to let them know that they're doing a great job.
Thank you. Anyone else? Public comment. Anything that's not on tonight's agenda? Okay. Seeing none, I'll close the public comment. Item 9, approval of the consent calendar. Are there any changes, corrections, or revisions to the consent calendar?
I move adoption of the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. That motion carries. Thank you very much. Item 10, presentations. We have a proclamation to present this evening for declaring it Bike to Work Day and Bike to Work Month. Is there anyone here from the Bike to Work organization?
Mayor, Council, thank you for having me. My name is Wendy Hilberman, and I'm the Napa County Bicycle Coalition's Executive Director. And this is the first time in Napa County that we have done proclamations, so I'm very excited to be here.
Well, then let me present this to you, Wendy, declaring May 2009 Bike to Work Month and May 14th, 2009 as Bike to Work Day. Whereas bicycle commuting is an effective means to improve air quality, reduce traffic congestion and noise, and to conserve energy. Whereas bicycle commuting benefits both employees, employers through better employee health and fitness, reduced commuting, parking, and health care costs, and whereas May is National Bike to Work Month to promote the bicycle as a means of transportation and recreation. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Cynthia Saucerman, Mayor, on behalf of the town of Yountville and the Yountville Town Council, do hereby proclaim May 2009 as National Bike to Work Month and May 14th, 2009 as Bike to Work Day.
Yay! Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So get those bikes out, dust them off. The second presentation this evening is by our Assessor County Recorder, John Tudor. With good news, I hope.
Well, not as bad as it could be. First of all, I want to let you know that I'm on one of the Bike to Work teams. I commute to work on my bicycle, and so you can't vote for my team. I have to put in the miles, but we're doing our best. There are a number of teams throughout the valley that coordinate riding and try and get as many points depending on how many miles they ride to and from work. So it's a wonderful effort, and I've participated for many years. I have 3 topics tonight. I'll be very brief on each of them. The agenda said I'd be talking about the 2008 assessment roll. Of course, I think I've already brought you that information back last year, but I want to talk a little bit about the 2009 assessment roll, which is where you asked about the news. We have looked at Yountville, and we are not seeing the kinds of declines in Yountville that we're seeing in other parts of the county. Just to give you an example, last year, 40% of the homes in American Canyon were in what we call a decline in value status, which means that their value on January 1st, 2008 was less than their factored base year value. And that was going back to about 2004. We expect to take homes in American Canyon back into the late 90s this time. We've looked at all those homes we reduced for last year. They're all being reduced again, and an average of 32% more down. So that's the worst case in the county. Because they're a small community, they've had a lot of recent growth. Their total assessed value last year went down 1.73%. Their whole city value went down because of this decline in the real estate market. To give you a counter to that, in 2004, their assessed value went up 32% in 1 year. So that was the boom, and now, unfortunately, that's the bust. I won't go into a lot of other details, but just to put this in perspective for the town of Yountville, in the 90s, excuse me, when we had the last downturn, Yountville was not very much affected at all. I think 0.1% of your assessment roll was not enrolled because homes had declined a little bit. And this past year, Yountville had very few declines in value, a couple, mostly condominiums. I just talked to our staff this week, excuse me, and I had to testify before a committee in Sacramento today, so my voice is starting to give on me. We don't see the kinds of declines we're seeing in American Canyon or Napa. We're starting to see some declines in St. Helena and in Calistoga, but Yountville still seems pretty protected from that. Not completely. You're not going to see 0.1% decline. You're probably going to see in the under double digits % of decline this year, but not overall. Your roll's still going to grow because of your neighbor. Trying to think that way, the Bardessono Inn, we're going to put a large part of its value on the roll this year. We're talking to the owner, and of course they're seeing the impacts of the economic times, so my job as the county assessor is to do my best idea of what its current market value at about a 95% complete state was on January 1st of 2009, but that's going to be some dollars that we'll add to you. So I expect you'll have an overall increase in your roll. Just to give you an example, last year, when we finished the Solage Resort, the city of Calistoga had a 12% increase in its roll just from that one $30 million injection. Now, I'm afraid we may take Solage down this year because they're suffering the same kinds of impact of the rest of the hospitality industry. But overall, I would not see this as the kind of news I had to take to the American Canyon City Council a week and a half ago. So it's not something I would be concerned about, and I will have those numbers for you sometime in late July when we close the assessment roll, and I know. But I don't see any major surprises in the downward direction coming for the town of Yountville. My second topic is this property tax reassessment scam that you've been reading about. Just briefly, an outfit out of Los Angeles mailed letters to several thousand property owners in Napa Valley saying that if they would pay the company $179, they'd file a request for a decline in value with my office. Well, I'm cheap. I do it for free. And so we've been telling people not to send any money, not to respond in any way to that letter, except to call me. And I've had a number of calls from people in Yountville. Yountville, what, did anybody on the council get one of those? So I've had a number of calls from people in Yountville. I've talked to over 120 people on the phone, and I'm working my way through 400 emails. And I've been keeping people up to date. The key thing is, if any of you in your positions of leadership or the staff know anybody who did make the mistake and send the $179, and I've already talked to 4 or 5 people who stopped payment on their checks. They were already in the mail, but they were able to stop them. The district attorney needs to know that, and I haven't seen tonight's paper yet, but Gary Lieberstein, the DA, and I did a news release, which I hope will be out in the Sun this week, saying if anybody did send their money in and their check was cashed, the district attorney needs to get from their bank, through them, a photocopy of both sides of the check, plus anything they have left from the mailing they responded to. So as you talk to the community, that would be very helpful. We believe we'll be able to get all that money back, plus some big fines if they haven't flown to the Grand Cayman Islands. But throughout the state, this outfit sent millions of letters in California, and throughout the state, the district attorneys are cooperating, and so, of course, is the Attorney General. But they need this kind of evidence if people did fall for the scam. Hopefully nobody here did, but if they did, they should follow the directions in the news release that came out. And if there's anybody here who did send the money and had their check cashed, I'd love to talk to you for a minute when I'm done with my presentation, because it's very important that we get those victims into the system so that the DA can move forward. And my final topic, I'm wearing my I voted button. Just to remind you, the special election is coming up on May 19th. As you know, in the November election, Yountville had no polling places. We had converted all the polling places to vote by mail. We have done another analysis, and because of the huge growth in registration for the presidential election, 2 of the precincts went over the limit to be converted to vote by mail. So I've reopened those 2 precincts, but they're being consolidated because, unfortunately, we don't expect a high turnout in this election. So the polling place will be at Rancho de Napa. We can't use your wonderful community center yet because it's still under construction. And we're also holding our vote-by-mail assistance center at the same location. The vote-by-mail assistance center will be open Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, beginning May 16th. And, of course, Election Day is May 19th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So voters who want to vote at their polling place on Election Day will go to the community room at Rancho de Napa. Those who've gotten a ballot already and either damaged it or want to hand deliver it can begin coming to the VAC at the library at Rancho de Napa starting Saturday the 16th. Those are my topics. I'd be happy to answer any questions if any members have any.
Does council have any questions? Councilmember Chilton?
John, one question on the reassessment of values.
Yes.
I think we have one responsibility here. You say there's good news for the town, which is, our overall assessed value will probably be very stable in general. As an individual property owner, in some ways I want my assessment to go down as much as possible to avoid having to pay tax.
The bad news is your house isn't worth what you're paid for it,
Correct.
but the good news is your
You have to pay
property
as much
tax
tax.
bill goes down.
Do you have, Your office, does it have I understand the Prop 13 requirements in terms of I think it's 2% per year, which could come into effect if you had a house that was devalued someday in the future. Do you have an obligation to go out and reassess all houses and all property based on market factors, or is that something your office is doing on its own volition? How does that work?
Well, the law says that the assessor's job is to be fair and equitable. And clearly, if someone's house isn't worth their Prop 13 base year value, to be fair, I need to catch that. So we've written a computer program that looks at, and we didn't extend it to Yountville last year. We only had 2 condominiums that we needed to look at. This year, we're looking at every single family residence in Yountville, St. Helena, Calistoga. Of course, we've looked at them all in Napa and American Canyon last year. So we're taking that responsibility very seriously. In addition, we're urging people to contact us. We have a form on our website that people can fill in and send to us, but a phone call or an email is perfectly adequate. And my email and phone number on my desk or on the website. So all people need to do if they want their house to make sure it's looked at is to contact me, and we'll make sure it's added to the list. But for this year, we expanded it, and the reason our field staff appraiser was here was to do some of her preparatory work for making those decisions, and she reported back to the chief appraiser and to myself that things still look pretty stable here. We are going to reduce some values, but your constituents can be assured that if they bought any time since 1997 or 8, we're looking at every house, but clearly people who bought in 82 and 92, they're still fine. Their Prop 13 base year value is only going up 2% a year. One thing people don't understand, and thank you for asking the question, 2 things are, one, if you bought your house in 1982 for $100,000, just to pick a number, in 2006 it may have been worth $600,000, and now it's only worth $400,000. That's quite a decline. That's a 33% decline. However, your base year value is still only $200,000. So even though you went down, you're still well below that, and you will get the 2% increase because the law requires that inflationary adjustment be made unless the price is the value has gone below the base year value. The second thing I just want to point out, and I've been surprised talking to these 120 people or more over the last few days, is a lot of people think they're not under Proposition 13 unless they owned their home in 1975. And of course, that's not the case. Anybody who buys starts with a new base year value. And if you bought in 91, you can tell today that you're better off than the person who bought in your subdivision in 2004, because your base year value from 91, say, is $280,000, and they just paid $450,000. So you are protected no matter when you bought or built. And then, of course, as the house next door comes down, they will not get down as low as you are because you still have that old base year value, but they will come closer together. One final thing to respond to your question. I'm not limited to the 2% going down. As I said, we're taking homes in American Canyon down 32% last year. We took them down 25%. Many of the homes in American Canyon are close to half of what people paid for them. By the same token, when the market starts to recover, I don't have to go back up at 2% a year. I'm not going to jump people up 50% in 1 year because the market is not going to do that. We hope if it does, there's another bubble, and that's a bad thing. But we can go up 10, 15, 20% over a period of years. But that base year value ticking along at 2% in the background is always going to be the ceiling. And when their value comes back, it'll level off and start up just at the 2%.
Great, thank you.
I had a question. John, I'm just curious on your evaluations. Obviously, we have quite a few mobile home park residents here who obviously don't own the land but own the unit. Does your calculations, do they pretty much move the same? Or do you find that maybe those might drop faster than a stick-built home, or what?
That's an excellent question. First of all, many of your residents in the manufactured home parks are not on the property tax roll. Their homes have been there since before 1980, and they're still being assessed by HCD, much like a license plate sticker.
Correct.
And their minimum, I think, was $16. It may have gone up, but that's what they're paying in lieu fee. So only the residents who've bought since 1980 or moved a new home into the park since 1980 are actually on the county property tax rolls. Now, we have a special way of assessing manufactured homes by law. We should look at that home, whether it's in this gorgeous town of Yountville or whether it's in the middle of Los Angeles somewhere in a bad neighborhood. The home is worth the same. It's the lot that's worth more. And they don't own the lot. As you pointed out, the park owner owns the lot. So we don't look at the location of the manufactured home. We take the manufactured home, we look at a book that says what its cost was to build and how much it's depreciated from the time it was built. And so most of those values are well below, first of all, they're well below the sales price. Even in Rancho de Napa and in Gateway, sales prices have been up in the high 100,000s, mid 200,000s. We're only assessing those homes at 60 or 70,000 because we're not trying to pick up the value of the land. We do have a few manufactured homes down in American Canyon in one park that we have reduced and held reduced for a number of years because they got way out of whack down there from what even the home was worth. But most of the manufactured homes on the property tax roll are still very low compared to their sales price, and therefore their only adjustment is through depreciation, and they're not affected from property values, from the manufactured home value itself. Of course, they're affected on their sales price, but their manufactured home value is so well below that we don't make many adjustments.
Thank you.
Mr. Tuda, can you give us your website address in case people would like to contact you?
Sure. Let me give you my email directly. It's jteur@co.napa.ca.us. And the website address is the same except with a www in front, not my name. And when you get to the website, in the middle of the home page are what are called quick menus, and the top one says departments, and you just click on assessor, you pull down the menu and you click on assessor, and that'll take you to all my articles I've written. I have over 100 articles on the website, plus that form if anybody does want to file a form.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for asking.
Councilmember Chilton?
I want to switch topics slightly. You brought up the special election.
Yes.
And I think 2 precincts that are now 2 out of 5 here in town that will be polling place.
That's right.
Do you foresee, shall I call, some stabilization in vote by mail, vote at a polling place? I mean, we've had this, every election seems to be changing back and forth and back and forth. I know there's some discomfort with only vote by mail, not having a polling place. It certainly changes some of the nature of the election. I think it'll change turnout when people have to come to a polling place and not get vote by mail automatically. What do you see coming?
Well, let me just say that my response to start this process was because of lines at polling places, not in Yountville, but even in St. Helena and Calistoga in November of 2006. And knowing that we had the presidential election coming up, I wasn't going to have one. I probably had several hundred voters turn away from the gubernatorial election in 2006 because there were 45-minute to an hour lines at lunch and after work, and people just weren't going to wait that long in line. We have very committed voters, but I can understand that. So that's when I made the concentrated effort to convert people to vote by mail. Now, the law says I can only do that if a polling place has less than 250 voters who come to the polling place. And so we went from 99 physical polling places down to 41 for November. Now we're back to 55. It is going to go up and down a little bit. I don't see it changing much now until the presidential election in 2012 because registration tends to drop off. We're already down. We had 71,600 voters registered in November of 2008, and we're down to just over 70,000 now. And that'll continue to drop off as people, move and don't re-register, and there isn't all the excitement of the president, especially this presidential election. So I don't see this happening a lot from now on. I may not convert people back to vote by mail even if I could, but if I have to by November of 2012, I will do so because my primary responsibility is to make sure that there's no one turned away from their polling place.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Sussman.
Thank you.
All righty, item 11, public hearing retail diversity policy. May we have staff report, please?
Thank you. The retail diversity policy that's included in a resolution in your packet is the result of 3 discussions staff has had with the council over the past year, centered primarily around wine tasting uses and resident serving uses. And it's a suggestion to provide those uses and accommodate them, but ensure other retail is also provided along with them. The popularity and frequency of the wine tasting proposals that have come into the planning department continue with high interest and high level of interest. So for the near term, we don't see that trend changing. And the retail diversity policy establishes some guidelines that we would be advising applicants that come in for that use, that they need to, and we've termed the wine tasting in this case the primary use, and they would be obligated to provide a secondary use at levels described in this resolution that I'll go over. This retail diversity policy is not necessarily restricted to the wine tasting uses, but could be applied to any use that came to the town on a basis or a frequency that it became somewhat of a mono retail prospect for all of our leasable space in the commercial districts. It applies only to the commercial districts, and therefore we've excluded specifics about the wine tasting uses that include hours of operation and special events and whether they have food or not. And a lot of that is specific to the capability of the location, to whether they can accommodate some of those activities. So the policy is suggesting that, first of all, the council would declare or determine that that type of business has become overrepresented in the commercial districts, and then the policy would apply. This does exclude specifically restaurant and inn uses. Those are viewed as core to our tourist economy. A minimum, and this is probably the main idea of the retail diversity policy, is that the secondary use would be required at a level of 25% of the net floor area in the established use. And this would mean areas that are accessible to the public. The nature of the secondary use shall be approved concurrent with the use permit approval of the primary use. And this, as pointed out in the staff report, becomes possibly the most difficult part of this policy, is determining what is distinct enough from the primary use to where it's not a token effort by the primary use to meet this requirement. It needs to be distinct from the primary use sufficiently in order to meet the test of maintaining retail diversity and be sufficiently substantial in quantity, availability, and display presentation to provide an independent shopping opportunity apart from the primary retail use. The secondary retail products offered shall be integrated throughout the retail space as practically feasible and not segregated to a separate area that could be closed off or screened off. And that the secondary retail use be operated concurrently and in conjunction with the primary use. It's also the secondary retail use be maintained as an essential element of the total operation of the merchandise, and that the merchandise shall remain available for inspection and purchase at all times the primary use is open. They can't, meaning they can at some point after they start the use decide they don't want to be in that business anymore and discontinue it. And this last provision is specific to wine tasting rooms, and it has to do with that there shall be no further approval of wine tasting only rooms, those uses without secondary retail, beyond those currently approved. New wine tasting rooms shall include secondary retail. And that is the essentially the policy we are proposing. If you have any questions, I could answer.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for staff at this time? Councilmember Moeller?
In there, you said, you talked about accessory uses, but in some of the zoning, it talks a lot about subordinate and complementary to the primary use. So how do we resolve that conflict in language?
Well, what it says in the staff report is that what will prevail is the language that's in the resolution. The staff report does suggest that ideally the secondary use products would reflect the agriculture of Napa Valley and be locally produced, but it doesn't require that they be.
Okay, so another question I have is on item number 7. It said, talks about the secondary retail use shall be maintained as an essential element of the total operation. So if somebody opens a shoe store and they don't sell any shoes, and they want to then move in hardware, and you've already approved their use permit for this secondary use in conjunction with the wine permit, how do you resolve that?
I think in that case, they would come back in and amend their use permit to reflect the new secondary use, which gets approved at the same time as the primary use, but they can amend it to offer an alternative product.
Okay, those are my questions for now, thanks.
Any more questions? Councilmember Tilton?
This question's for you, Amy. One of the things that's been discussed in the past is is it the business of the council? Can we regulate certain types of businesses? This is certainly aimed at wine tasting rooms, regardless of whatever it's called on the title of it. Can you talk a little bit about just some of the basics of discretionary use permits, the fact this is a policy, and how our ability to make a determination for the town that we believe that we're over concentrated in certain areas and therefore can deny a use permit when we've given it to other people in the past?
Well, you have fairly broad discretion under your police powers to regulate in the interests of the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of the town of Yountville. So as this is proposed, based on your determination as a policy that retail diversity is in the interests of the town residents because it allows them to have access to more than just, in this case, wine tasting rooms, that would be sufficient justification for implementing this kind of regulation. I think in terms of the wisdom of trying to regulate retail in that, what business will be attracted and what business may or may not want to comply with these regulations, I mean, that's sort of outside of your control, but I think that these are appropriate in advancing those interests under your police power to regulate for the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. You can, there are areas where you can cross the line when you start getting into, is this regulation of, for example, interstate commerce, where you have a dormant commerce clause under the federal constitution, and I don't see that this comes anywhere close to that at this point. So,
Does that, this is one question that has come to me, is when it comes to wineries, or wine tasting rooms, the ability to be local. And I'm not sure how much into play if the wineries, Yountville Appellation, local ownership in terms of Yountville. I think that my understanding is our ability to do that starts to get in some of those issues of saying if you live in St. Helena and your vineyards in Howell Mountain, sorry, you can't open up a wine tasting room. That oversteps those bounds.
right, I think when you start talking about the ownership of the business, that's where you get very, very much closer to interstate commerce, because ownership of businesses is not something within the local jurisdiction. So those requirements, if there's a justification, may be appropriate when it comes to local products are encouraged and along those lines. But when you say, for example, that we only want local ownership of the business, that's where you start, that may be a Commerce Clause issue.
Well, you use the word encourage. What about the idea of restricting, I mean, I don't know if Italian winemaker legally, could we bar an Italian winemaker for serving Italian wines because they're not Napa Valley wines, or they're not, Yountville appellation wines? Is that something
Well, again,
we could do?
It would have to be supported by some kind of finding that it advances a local interest that outweighs the effect that it might have on interstate commerce. And I don't know, without seeing what those findings might be, whether that would cross the line or not, if there is a supportable justification that's within your police powers to impose that regulation. It is just when you think of what you're trying to regulate and the effect that it could have on interstate commerce, the inability of somebody to operate here when they should be able to operate anywhere, given that they're following all the other laws that allows them to operate. If you don't have a strong enough justification for the local regulation, then the argument can be made by that person that you're interfering with their ability to engage in interstate commerce.
Even though we're talking about interstate, does that still apply to, Santa Barbara County versus Napa County? Does that principle still apply?
It could.
Because it's not intrastate.
Right. I mean, it could get into
Okay.
that area when you're talking about intrastate as well, because the same analysis might apply.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions for staff?
Oh, Bob, I had one, you comment in there, I think a little bit to what Lewis was going for about possibly a 75% Napa Valley wines, and that would have to be affiliated that way. You didn't include that in the ordinance, though, I see.
No, that's specific to the wine tasting use, and we are on page 2 of the staff report. There's a recommendation that the primary use, if it's wine tasting, that products offered shall include the requirement that the grape source maintain a local relationship by having that minimum of 75% from Napa Valley.
Any more questions?
Well, can I follow up on that?
Yes.
I guess the reason I asked that is that an ordinance itself, or not the ordinance, I'm sorry, the resolution doesn't mention anything about that.
No, that's part of a separate package, if you will, of requirements that are specific to wine tasting uses that would be evaluated and considered at the time the use is considered.
Okay,
Now, you can, we were trying to keep this generic enough to where it applies to a variety of uses. However, that's a more specific to the wine tasting use that would be applied at the time of the use permit.
I guess, and maybe Stephen, one of the reasons I know that we have talked about this is trying to clarify for staff when an applicant comes. So when I read the resolution, it doesn't talk about those specifics. Ultimately, the applicant, if they're a wine tasting room that meets the retail diversity policy, could not meet that 75% and still come to council, and they could say there's no ordinance or resolution that prevents that.
What staff would propose is a two-step approach. First, when we actually talked about some of this and the conversation came back to focusing a little bit about what did the town want to achieve as opposed to what were we trying to prevent, the goal was retail diversity. And then part of the discussion came, how many coffee shops is too many? So staff took the opportunity to go back to heart and focus on the question, what does the town want to achieve? And the town wants to achieve a reasonable, diverse retail base representing the fact that we know we are a tourism economy. But, we could have too many galleries. We could have too many. So the idea was we start with this, focusing on retail diversity. Based on that, as we go through, it may be appropriate that the council then comes back with a more specific policy guideline about what it is you're looking for beyond this, if there are certain things related to tasting rooms, such as source of grapes, appellation, other criterion that you may want to adopt in the future. But our attempt here was to segregate the specifics of how and what the wine tasting room might look like out, allowing for the market to do some of that. Secondarily, I do think staff would propose adding a clarification to 7 to address Councilmember Chilton's question that the applicant could come in and amend their secondary retail use. We certainly would not want to foster a secondary retail component that was not economically viable. But what we do want to say is don't play games with us, and you're going to have to replace it with another approved secondary retail component. And that's one thing in our various discussions that's been very challenging, is how do we make sure that this is not an effort simply by somebody to get what they want, and then the secondary aspect or the additional retail becomes less viable. So I think we should add a sentence that talks about the amendment. Should somebody want to change, that's appropriate, and that way it's in that policy.
And also, to your earlier point, it's pointed out in the staff report that there, on items specific to the wine tasting use, the council's been up to now fairly consistent on some operational requirements of hours of operation that are setting the opening and closing. Also, special events and the number of minor and major. And we're suggesting in the staff report, too, when it comes to the wine tasting uses, that we take a more conservative approach on the number of special events and start out at a lower number than what's been allowed by practice up to now. And then, based on performance, ease into a higher number. It's up to now been possible to have one every other week. 24 has been the commonly approved number.
Vice Mayor?
I do have a few questions. One, I'll address something, Steve, that you just brought up, and either Bob or Steve could answer this. If the intent is to have this be generic for retail, why number 8, that is wine room specific?
This does lead to that, overlap where we were trying to, the concern that's been raised in some of the community issues where we don't want to see an increase in the number of standalone tasting rooms. So that's where that specific item came in from that. Certainly, if you wanted to work at pulling that out of this item, but what we're really doing is also, part of the guidance is, if I'm a landlord and there's a space that's open for rent, what can I use with it? What is the town interested? So that's where the genesis of this particular policy. Again, getting into, is the vintner local? Is the winery local? Is it a new? Those are levels that the council could further continue and refine, and we still think that's a different subtlety that would be specific, because again, we may be having the discussion or complaint that there's too many coffee shops, too many art galleries, and then we may be looking at that. But this does address the initial concern that was addressed by some of the residents in their petitions and their prior comments, as well as some of the council dialogue on the fact in your discussions that you could separate the standalone tasting room with no other area versus some of our existing mixed-use retails. Again, this is a representation from staff based on the various feedback we've received from the council, and it's certainly your prerogative to add, modify, or suggest to us that you have some additional ideas and bring it back in 2 weeks. This is our attempt to put together ideas we've heard from your discussions, and reflecting that this is one of those unique areas where you're providing a policy guidance on an item that's in flux and based on community input and various discussions. And staff, we want this to work for the council and for the community, and we think this is a good first step, and there may be need for more information on how you want to approach the wine tasting room industry, but we may be able to develop that in a separate policy statement.
Right, and if you accept the first 7 requirements on here, then it would be by necessity a restriction on the use that brought this to you to begin with. No more can just be wine tasting rooms. It would have to have the secondary use.
Right. Getting back to some of the other questions I had originally, I think for Bob, the measurement tool to determine if we have maxed out our comfort zone, whatever it might be, in your mind, is that measurement tool simply a vote of the council? You reference, at some point, we decide if there are too many of something, if there's too much of something. How is that measurement supposed to take place?
Well, I would see that playing out similar to the way the wine tasting has, we've come to the council and let you know the benefit of our experience at the counter and who we're hearing from as far as applicants and what's coming down the pipeline. And alert you to, this is popular, you're getting a lot of them, as you know already, and you're going to get more. So I would see it playing out that way.
Either brought forward by a council member or by staff who's recognized that there might be a concern.
Yes.
Or the public. I
Or the
think
public.
We have a very involved citizenry here, and they're not uncomfortable letting us know what they think in terms of that.
And I noticed, specifically in the title of this, you talk about this being a policy for commercial zoning districts. Is there a concern about any businesses that are not in the primary commercial corridor? If somebody has a business license to work out of their home or somewhere else, is that to be excluded from this?
No, that wasn't really the thinking. Although we have a couple of retained uses that are outside of the commercial zoning districts, I think it was just to underscore it's all inclusive of the commercial districts, regardless of, we have 3 commercial districts, and it would apply to each of them.
But is there a scenario where somebody outside of the commercial zone could bring a business permit forward? No.
No, let me clarify, because let me attempt to, I think, what we're really dealing with here is the commercial activity and retail diversity. By our ordinance definition, somebody that is having a home occupation is not having a high level of activity. They're not allowed to set up a retail showroom and have people. So I think, that's what staff's trying to say, is that these guidelines are for active retail, and that really can only occur by a town ordinance in our commercial districts, and there are 3 commercial districts. So I hope that, I may be off base on the question, but I think that was kind of what you were trying to address, is the influence that it may have on home occupational businesses.
They would already be prohibited by other zoning regulations.
In terms of the scope of the business?
Well, to have anything even approaching a retail offering outside of a commercial district.
Okay. Then this actually may get back to Councilmember Chilton's question, Amy, of you about our ability to limit certain types of business. Certainly adult businesses, medical marijuana, certainly not an issue for us in Yountville, but there have been cities that have restricted those specific uses. You're saying if we prove there's a negative impact on the community, that's when you can regulate the specific business.
Right, and I think what you're giving yourself here in terms of a justification for regulating retail uses is a finding that diversity of uses is what best serves the community. So if any category of business appears on the verge of over proliferation, then what you're saying is it doesn't serve the residents of the town very well to have 12 nail salons or 12 pizza parlors or whatever that category of business becomes popular, as Bob stated. And so under the general police power to regulate for the general health, safety, and welfare, you're saying it is in the interest of the welfare of the residents to have a variety of businesses. Now, there are other considerations when you talk about regulating adult businesses or, things that bring up First Amendment kinds of issues that are separate and apart from this idea that you're saying we need a retail diversity to serve our population.
Okay, thank you. 2 more questions. This one's, I'm not sure which of staff this is most appropriate for, but it also gets to the trying to propose a specific percentage of homegrown whatever. It just seems like that's, and I realize that's not specified as in the ordinance, but I think if we're talking about generic retail beyond the wine industry, Bob, are you saying that there would be a recommended percentage that would be up for discussion with every applicant.
Well, that specific point is something staff's pondered maybe more than anything about this retail diversity. And in the end, rather than be prescriptive or have a menu of, you have to select from one of these uses as a secondary use, to have the applicant, based on their interests and expertise, come forward with some proposal, rather than try to second-guess them. And as far as it being locally based, there is a statement in the report here that talks about, for secondary uses, a wide range of potential acceptable uses are possible, and while preferable, do not necessarily need to have any relationship with local wine or agriculture. It's more of a preference type of thing, that no denying people come here because of what the Valley has to offer, and that's what the Valley has to offer is also something useful to residents, and it was seen as something that would serve a couple of purposes.
I guess the problem I'm having with it is, even if it isn't specifically stated in here, if you're talking about restricting the product that's for sale, in the case of the wine, it's easy to say if it's locally sourced fruit, if it's a local winemaker, that's local, and if it's 75% of that, that's one thing. But if it's something like clothing or artwork or coffee beans that are generated from somewhere outside the area, we're not applying that same restriction.
And I think that's to the point that staff is indicating a preference is for that, but it's not being written in there because that's exactly it, is we want the business model. In our current discussion, staff has run into 5 or 6 different potential applicants with probably 7 or 8 different business models and potential partners, some more complementary to wine, some actually very diverse with wine. And that's led us to realize that the private market really should take the lead in this, and if 2 or 3 folks have an idea that they think will all work together and they bring a diverse retail mixture, because last time I looked, we aren't growing cotton in the Napa Valley, so our ability to have clothes that are, quote, locally produced is probably pretty limited. We probably don't produce books, but people tell us they'd love a bookstore. So we're trying to say, if you're bringing some stuff, have it reflect the flavor of the Napa Valley and the lifestyle, but there's a whole other component that residents would like on a daily basis that necessarily don't have anything to do with that. So that led us back to, if people are looking for ideas, staff will have some input to give them, but the meat and potato of your policy guideline is you will have retail diversity. You go figure out what you want to do and bring your business partners together.
Last question relates to online business, and there's no reflection in here of online sales or business. We're just talking brick and mortar, and if you're talking about 25% of net floor area, how does that whole internet business element get factored in here, or does it?
It doesn't, and I think that's an important thing, that we're not attempting to regulate that. If our businesses have a successful online component, that's great. What we're trying to prevent is every storefront being a tasting room with nothing else in it. So I would say that there's no direct interest on our part in terms of regulating the online commerce. So if every retail component chooses to have an online element to it, that's great. But what we're really looking for is that when somebody's walking down the street, they look in the windows, they open the doors, they're going to see more than a series of tasting rooms, and that retail diversity is going to be made. So that's where we're coming from this, and I can honestly say staff had no discussion related to trying to measure or monitor the online sales component.
But is that why you're calling out the net floor area, the physical space, versus the percentage of business?
Correct, because that's what people, when they're walking and having their experience, that's what they're going to be running into. Because frankly, all of us from an online perspective can get whatever we may want online, and we don't need to even go downtown to do that. So what we're trying to protect is that diversity of experience when you're wandering the shops, when you're looking, there's something in there for you physically to see, choose, shop, pick up, look around, do.
And let me point out, what you're doing is not regulating business. You're regulating land uses. I mean, it has the effect of encouraging retail diversity because you're using a land use regulation to do that, but you're not regulating the business itself. That's not within the scope of your authority to do in terms of, in particular, of online businesses, unless, at least not in this context, because what you are doing is implementing land use regulation.
And the 25% is a number that we came up with. It could be as you deem appropriate, more or less. But the idea of net had more to do with the concept of a representation that's fairly substantial in the store, that's evident to a shopper and provides a good mix, as opposed to you could have half the storeroom. And if you took the gross area, 25%, the representation is less of a fair amount to the area that is accessed by the customer.
Thank you.
And I think in closing, one of the things would be that these are guidelines, and these are meant so that the council can express and respond to community concerns that we're trying to address prior to the general plan update. And, you know, if we find after applying these that we need to do some fine-tuning, we can certainly come back and respond and make changes at that point in time. So, you know, this policy can evolve as the council sees fit.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter this evening? The resolution in particular, I hope you've all read it. Yes, sir. Don, come on up.
Don Henfling, 6545 Yonge Street. And a variation on this theme was addressed by the council, I don't remember exactly when, I think it was about 10 years ago. Mary Lou Holt was mayor, Lou Jefferson was on the council. That gives you some kind of an idea. And the topic was really how to increase local serving businesses in Yountville. And at the time, there seemed to be a lot of art galleries. That seemed to be the main focus of use permits. And the only time I really remember seeing the council utilize that policy was when George and Alice Rothwell owned the Antique Fair. And somebody wanted to put in a competing antique shop in Piazza Quercia. And the Rothwells effectively convinced the council that this competitor was not going to be a local serving business. Which is probably unfortunate, because I think if they had two antique shops, it probably would have attracted more, but that was not my decision. Anyway, at the time I was wondering, why does Yountville have so few local serving businesses? And so I looked around and I found another town in California that had the same approximate population, and it had bookstores and used car lots and pharmacies and movie theaters and had its own high school and even a small airport. The town happened to be Weaverville, which is the county seat of Trinity County. There's not another large city until you get to Reading, which is 50 miles away. And all the small towns around it all came into Weaverville. And I realized that Yountville is just the opposite. We're the smallest town. We all go to Napa. And so I realized we're probably never going to get any local serving businesses here. And that was, 10 years ago? And since then, we've doubled our population of tourists, and the closest retail center in Napa has really expanded. We have a Target and Whole Foods and Peet's Coffee, and we have a bookstore and all of this. So my question is, if this topic was not effectively dealt with by the council 10 years ago, what makes you think that you can, with conditions making it even more difficult, what makes you think that you can address the concerns now? And specifically? You know, I mean, do you see me walking into a wine shop and saying, I'll take a glass of Chardonnay and those high heel sneakers in size 11 or something? You know, there are shoe stores 10 minutes away on a divided highway. It's easy to get to. I would love to have more local serving businesses in Yountville. That was a real issue of mine 10 years ago. But I don't know how you would go about doing that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Rob?
Hi, I'm Rob Anglin, 1891 Mulberry Street. And I think it's actually a good guideline. And I think the thing that would be most important to me would be that if I was walking down the street and I saw some retail aspect in one of these wine tasting rooms, that I could go in there and look around without feeling compelled or pressured into doing a wine tasting. You know, if I walked in, if I saw something like some book that was of interest to me, I would want to feel comfortable walking in there. A lot of people in this town window shop, and I do too. So I would like to feel that I would have the ability to walk in there without feeling pressure to do wine tasting. But I think that the idea of having these mixed uses so that it attracts a broader range of people coming to the retail besides the wine tasting is a good direction to follow. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Jody Gingrich, 6468 Washington Street. I'm very pleased to see this guideline. I think it's a good start, and I'm glad that there is thought and some planning being given as to how our the commercialness of our community grows and continues and develops. And so I'm very pleased with what the council and what the staff has done. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments on this issue this evening? All righty, seeing none, I will close the public comment, bring it back to council for further discussion and or decision. Who wants to go first? Councilmember Moeller?
Start. I also think the staff has done a great job in trying to organize us and really bring a lot of our collective thoughts together. So I'll start with mine. I am okay with a general retail diversity policy within the primary commercial and the Old Town commercial based on our zoning, but I still feel strongly that we have very, very precise wording in our residential scale commercial zoning that I'm not willing to overturn at this point, that says other businesses that rely principally on visitors shall not be permitted. So I would like this, and I have some more comments, but I would say that it applies to primary commercial and Old Town commercial, but wine tasting rooms are excluded by our current language in our zoning for the residential scaled commercial, unless there's 51% non-wine tasting facilities in the residential scale commercial, then we would be consistent with our zoning. In item number 5, I don't really see the prescriptive value of having 25% all mixed in. I mean, I think we need to leave that open. Back to these shoes, you know, I don't want to have to walk by the Chardonnays to look for black shoes and go over by the Zinfandel to, you know, look for, you know, yellow shoes. Having shoes all mixed up, you know, it doesn't really make any sense if there's shoes in there. Or if somebody wants to have a dog walking business, you don't want to have them, you know, go behind a Petite Sirah to, you know, talk about poodles. So that just doesn't really seem to fit in there to me very well. So I would strike number 5 about, you know, the businesses.
Well, let me
Secondary
try
use
to-
has to be all mixed up.
Well, I think you're taking it to one level, and really what the What it means by integrated is that it can't be in a area that is completely closed off and there's no interrelationship between the two. I don't think, I certainly know that I don't believe Bob would, we recognize that certain parts of the tasting business need to be discrete and separate, the same way there may be different counters and things like that. But the intent is, if you've got a $4,000 or a 4,000 square foot space, what we don't want to see is somebody taking 2,000 square feet, having a wall, and then you always find it shut off, and then the tasting room looks like a separate standalone tasting room. That's the intent of the language in item 5, is that they're interrelated.
Okay, so maybe we just need to work on that language a little bit better for that. Then in terms of the 75% that's locally derived, I'm fine if we're going to be a little prescriptive that these wine tasting rooms have to bring in some diverse retail. I'm willing to be open to whatever. I don't necessarily have to. I think it'd be great to have a made in Yountville store with T-shirts and all that stuff. But if I'm open to whatever diverse retail they want. I don't really need something that's really made here. Plus, if you're talking about the wine, if a winery, wants to source all, one grape for one varietal from Lake County, it's going to confuse everything. So I don't really see the value there.
That's not in the language of your resolution.
Right, but I just wanted to, I didn't really have a question about it. I just kind of wanted to bring it up during the comment period here. And
direction, though, as we advise applicants, if comes out to be the consensus.
I mean, if we really are going to say we want more retail diversity, then, then I'm willing to let market forces say, bring us something kind of creative, and because we have to, approve the use permits anyway. Let's see what they can kind of come up with here. And then I did have one question I forgot to ask. You didn't have like Hope and Grace, and I assume you didn't have Hill Family because it's not a wine tasting only or a wine shop. But you may have missed some of the current wineries in here. I know that's just a information section.
Well, that was a listing of the rooms that are exclusively wine tasting only, offer no retail other than maybe wine related, like a Corkscrew or something like that. But we tried to divide them into the ones that are only that, wine tasting, the ones that are wine shops, which we saw as Rosinger, and the V Wine Cellar, that offer not one brand but a variety of labels. And then the rest were with retail.
Okay, so I just don't want to let any of our current wine places think they've got to move out or anything like that. So, and 25% total floor space. I'm kind of open, and something in that range. It seems fairly reasonable to me. So, but overall, my primary comment is this should apply to primary commercial and Old Town commercial based on our zoning, because the RSC still specifically disallows it unless retail is 51%. Then I could consider it.
Councilmember Chilton?
Just a couple of comments on this first. My perspective on why this policy makes sense to even be considered. And I find it an unusual situation to be in, because despite the political winds of the nation, I'm probably the biggest free market capitalist you're going to find. But I think we're in a situation where around us, being in the county, St. Helena, the city of Napa is probably the one exception, the restriction that have been placed on wine tasting rooms and on wineries are severe. And Yountville is this little tiny island right in the middle of all of this growth, where we have, it's almost the Wild West of wine tasting rooms. And people have kind of realized that. And my concern has always been, when I was first on the council, Hill came online, and there was one or two other wine tasting rooms that started to bubble up, and I said, this is great for Yountville. It enhances the walking part of our town. It's a reason for visitors to come here and stay in town, go to restaurants, they can walk around. It gets them off of the streets, off of Highway 29. So I think all those things are positive. This has evolved in a very short amount of time to that clear reason of why this many wine tasting rooms are coming here, because with all the growth of wineries in the valley, there's nowhere else to go. So that's one of the reasons I do believe that it makes sense to encourage some retail diversity within that specific sector. It is ironic that we've excluded restaurants specifically, which I've had people tell me, how many more restaurants are you going to have in Yountville? And that's kind of our bread and butter in many ways, and this is, it's a wine and food economy. So I generally support this policy. I think Councilmember Moeller's comment about number 5, the only change I would make to point number 5 is that the integrated throughout the retail space. I think I would just change that to in the retail space, which kind of has the idea that it's not in a back room behind closed doors. I think the throughout may be the word that it sounds like it's going to be scattered throughout. Don Henfling had some good comments about local serving businesses. I have to say I don't really see this to be about local serving businesses. That's an entirely different topic, and Councilmember Moeller brought up residential scale commercial and what those definitions mean. I thought one thing that was interesting is in the ZDRB comments, all 5 of the members of that board really kind of talked about leaving things to flow with the market. Stitt talked about a laissez-faire approach. Matt Lamborn talked about the highest use as determined by market forces. Marita talked about attracting retail directed to locals is difficult. Jason Janes said the ship has sailed on the concept of local serving businesses. And Renata Halliday, the town needs to recognize that tourism is our industry. So I think that one thing that needs to be clear is I don't think that by passing this, we're sitting around and shooting at ourselves in the foot and saying, we don't want this to be a tourist economy. This town its economy is tourism, absolutely. It's to make sure that we have some diversity within that, and I would not support saying no more wine tasting in this town. But I think bringing some creative ideas into town and making sure that it's not just wine tasting room, wine tasting room, wine tasting room with nothing else to it is important. We do have a fairly limited amount of retail space, and I think that's why that it would be wise for this council to take this action. So I generally support the resolution. We've talked about a lot of details when it comes to 75%. I want to point out, and this has been pointed out, that's not in this resolution. And I think applicants need to understand, or it should be made clear by staff, that these are things that the council has talked about are positive attributes that would be looked favorably, but it's not part of the law. It's not part of our policies as a council. And if you want to bring something to council and you've got a new idea, by all means do that. And what we've actually put here, if it's passed, this provides some very minor outline of what is required, but it doesn't go into managing what a business should do. I can tell you that's not possible, and absolutely people are going to put in a retail use and it's not going to work, and they're come back and want to change it. That's the way business works. It's trial and error. So overall, I think this is positive, and I'd support it.
Thank you. Any comments, Councilmember Dutton?
Well, first off, I think both council members made excellent points, and I agree in generally with everything that was said. I would like to mention, and I'm glad Don Henflin brought up the issue that happened here about 10 years ago, because I think it really touched base not so much on local serving, but a little bit, I think, what Lewis had asked Amy about restricting people coming into. And for those of you who were here, I think Don put it very mildly. It was pretty ugly at times. And I know as a new resident, I was sort of surprised what went on and how they could literally run a business or blackball a business right out of town. And it was not nice, and I would hope it would never happen in this town again, because it was very self-serving, and I don't really think it accomplished anything. The only thing I would want to reiterate of what's been said, and I do firmly agree, that if you can't have the local serving businesses stand alone, this is certainly a good approach to bring something in, and I think you're going to see a tremendous amount of ideas, businesses come in, and as was mentioned, if they don't make it, they'll probably roll over to try something else again. So I think that's a great part of this, and you just never know what's going to catch hold, but at least there is going to be something out there. And I think the people that are setting up these businesses and doing the plans are far better at it than probably we are making the decisions up here. I mean, we sort of let them try within limits, that we set, and go from there. But overall, I think it's a great step in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Well, originally, my comment was going to be to continue this item because I don't think that this policy as it's written right now is nearly sufficient. But I'm willing to consider it as a first step with some modifications. I would not support it with item 8 listed, calling out wine tasting rooms. If the intent of this policy is to be generic and treat all retail equally, then we should not call out one retail use and prohibit it. The conditions 1 through 7, in my mind, would preclude 8 from even being needed because it couldn't exist. A wine tasting only room can't exist if the other conditions need to be met. And I realize these conditions are guidelines meant to give an applicant some clarity on what the expectation of the council is. 25% of net floor area, I think it's an arbitrary number, but I think again, it's a starting point. We may find that 25% is not appropriate for the sizes of businesses we have here in town, but we need to pick a number. And I think staff's calculation makes sense that it needs to have enough of an impact on the business space, or if it's 10%, then it may not even be visible and the diversity isn't achieved. I think, if you want to change the wording of item 5, I certainly read this not to mean you have to have one item right next to the other item on the same shelf. I don't think that taking this literally isn't the intent, and it also says as practically feasible. So clearly we're not asking somebody to pour a glass of wine next to a shoe. That doesn't make any sense to me. And what I don't want to confuse, though, and I've tried to continue to separate these issues, there is an ongoing debate. I believe wine tasting is a local serving business. This is not a local serving versus non-local serving policy. So whether we're talking about, that's why I don't think we should be talking about wine tasting facilities at all right now with this policy, regardless of what percentage of that business is wine tasting. So whether it's listed in part of our zoning or not, I don't think that's even part of this conversation tonight. So I support the intent. I think we definitely need to continue working on this policy. I don't think it gives enough. If I'm an applicant and I bring a plan forward to the town, this alone doesn't tell me enough what the town wants to have happen when you get down into the actual business plan. So I think we need to go a little further. But if this is our first step and we want to put this on the books, then as long as we remove item 8, I think I could support it.
Thank you for your comments. I had some problems with this resolution initially, and I was concerned about considering its adoption. Can't see it. But listening to the discussion here and the comments from the public, I'm more comfortable with approving it tonight than not. One of the reasons being, I saw it as being too restrictive. But then thinking about where it came from and why we're here tonight discussing it, we've struggled with the issue of a proliferation of wine tasting rooms in Yountville. The ZDRB has struggled with the same issue, and if you watch that meeting, you would know. It was very difficult for them to even come to any conclusions. But I agree with Councilmember Chilton, the market will dictate your business's success or failure. However, this policy was brought about by the proliferation of wine tasting rooms in Yountville. And so for us to consider a mixed or a retail diversity policy is important, and I think we need to address that. It doesn't address the local serving issues, whether they're zoned in primary commercial, residential scale commercial, or anything else. And that policy that Don mentioned came about because of that very reason. That situation I was here then, and I remember the whole thing playing out, and it wasn't pretty. And it's something that, like Mr. Anglin said, it's something that we can't resolve. We can't force local serving businesses into Yountville because they will not survive. We don't have the population base to support them. Just this is the first step in the right direction for retail diversity. I think of it in terms of, well, what's next? We're passing this policy because of the wine tasting room issue. What's next? Is it going to be art galleries? Is it going to be clothing stores? Is it going to be real estate businesses? What is it going to? What's next? And I kind of find, and I kind of find it difficult to appreciate, a certain sector of the business community to come forward and actually present to the council a proposal which would preclude another business of like or similar nature coming before the council to get approval as well, unless they had 25% of something totally unrelated to their business. So it really is restrictive, but again, it's only policy, it's only guideline, it's not cast in stone. It would not preclude you from opening up yet another art gallery or another real estate business. It's something that we have to consider on a case-by-case basis, and it's like reading the comments from the ZDRB. It's like Ms. Halliday indicated. At one time, I can recall when there were a number of antique stores in Yountville, but they all faded away and they all went out of business and they disappeared. Well, now we only have one. So I'm sure at some point there will come a time when we're going to have to enact this policy with respect to antique stores or art galleries. We could use a nice cheese shop. But I can support this. Whether we leave item 8 in there or not, after all, it is the reason we're here tonight discussing this. We can take it out, we can leave it in. I would not fail to support this just for that reason. Councilmember Chilton?
Oh, I want to, maybe it's a question for the Vice Mayor, because you talked about item 8. Item 1, that first provision specifically restricts this to a type of business that the council has a finding for, which is, in my opinion, item 8, which is wine tasting rooms, which the mayor's right. That's why we're here talking. It does not say that if you want to bring in a dry cleaners, which nobody's going to, but if they want to bring in dry cleaners, then you have to have 25% some other. It's simply within that one. So I'm not sure if the objection is, and I won't speak for you, whether we should not single out wine tasting rooms for retail diversity, or whether you think that this policy simply should be retail diversity, and then the council should make a further resolution to make that determination.
Well, I think I tried to state it in my earlier comments that if items 1 through 7 in this resolution are abided by, item 8 is not necessary. I do not want to single out a wine tasting facility as prohibited, and that's, in my mind, what item 8 does. I think that's my position. I would not support the resolution with item 8 as part of it. I would support the resolution with items 1 through 7. I think item 8 is unnecessary, and it also is too punitive to a single industry that maybe by the course of the market, that changes and it's no longer an issue, but then we've got on the books that we don't accept any wine tasting rooms, and we have to go back in and single that one out. I think you're assuming that we're going to continue to have the same number of tasting facilities indefinitely, and that it will always be on the verge in some people's minds of being too much. If this was crafted as staff said to be generic, then I think it should stay generic. Item 8 is not generic in my opinion.
My concern with that is I believe that if item 1, if we don't put in wine tasting rooms, then it reverts itself back to, at what point does the council just, I'm going to say arbitrarily, decide, you know what, it's Hill Family and a local and we like them, but the next person gets rejected and the next person, I like the fact that at this point in time, knowing what the situation is in Yountville, the council makes that determination. If we had this for antiques and somebody came forward and said, I've got a great idea for an antique, but we've got this problem, I think we'd go back and look at it and say, wow, you're probably right, and we could make that determination at that time. But I think for the clarity of what the situation is in Yountville right now, that's why I believe that H should stay in.
Well, and the problem with that premise in my mind is I have not drawn the same conclusion that single-use wine tasting is inappropriate in this town from here on out. Some of the council has made that point. I have not. I've not agreed to that, and that's why I'm not willing to stipulate that it's inappropriate. Okay. We have not. That's, to me, that this is almost an end around to stating something that the council has not stated as an entire board, which is that we don't want any more tasting rooms in Yountville.
I don't think it says that.
But I think it does, and what you just said, Councilmember Chilton, that if we need to go on record by saying that we will not allow another single-use tasting room, that's, to me, what this provision says. If we want to adopt the policy of needing retail diversity, great. And I think by definition, that then will exclude a single-use business, whether it be wine tasting or anything else.
I would just point out that by virtue of number 1, if the time you want to make the decision that it happens to apply to tasting rooms is when you get the next tasting room application, you're going to make some kind of finding that says we're at that point. And you're going to avoid the circumstance of, well, we like this particular single-use winery, single-label winery, so we're going to allow that use, by having to make the finding that this policy will come into effect because we know that 12 is too many, and this is the 12th application, and that would apply to any type of business. And so if you add 8 now, you are making that decision now, which you can do, but you may choose to reserve that until you get the next wine tasting only application, at which time then you could say, hey, we've adopted this policy. This is when it comes into effect.
Yeah, I just feel like we as a council in its entirety had, matter of fact, the majority of the council has said we do not want to restrict wine tasting facilities. So I'm not comfortable putting that in this diversity policy.
Are you saying wine tasting only? You say that we haven't said that we're restricting wine tasting only? We don't agree with that?
My understanding is that the majority of the council recently stated that we did not want to exclude wine tasting facilities from additional wine tasting facilities to come to town. That was on.
No, I'm saying wine tasting only.
Well, we don't know what the next application is going to look like, but what I'm saying
I'm just
is,
asking you a question, John. Wine tasting only.
I have not drawn the conclusion that wine tasting only should be prohibited.
Okay.
And I don't think this council has either. By including that in this policy, that's what I think the council is stating. And that's the part that I don't support.
Can we recraft, let me run this past you. We know why we're adopting this policy tonight. It says so in the recitals. Should we recraft number 8, to maybe just perhaps in general terms, say, new wine tasting rooms shall include secondary retail, and leave the rest of it out? Would you be comfortable with that?
If the council feels the need to single out wine tasting rooms in this policy, I would be willing to accept including wine tasting rooms as needing to have a secondary element. I think that's already done with items 1 through 7, like I've stated before. But if the majority, and the council doesn't necessarily need my supporting vote on this. If the rest of the council feels like this item should be included, then then you're making the statement that you want to prohibit any single-use wine tasting facility from here on out. I'm just not ready to make that statement. And I feel like items 1 through 7 serve what this intent is, which is promote retail diversity. What taking item 8 does out for me is it does not single out one retail use. I'm not supportive of singling out a single retail use. I welcome the diversity part of it, but not the exclusivity part of it.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to move that we adopt resolution number 2779-09, establishing a retail diversity policy for commercial zoning districts.
Are we going to change the language in number 7?
I think it's number 5. We're going to cross
Hold that
off
too.
throughout and put, with the following amendments, cross out the word throughout and replace with the word in number 5. And in number 7, we're going to allow for amendments of the secondary retail use after permits been issued.
A little language I prepared here is a type of secondary retail use may be amended by town council approval. Minor amendments may be approved by town staff.
I'm okay with that in my amended motion.
I'll second the motion.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Dutton?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dunbar?
No?
Mayor Sosserman?
Yes.
Councilmember Chilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Moeller?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion is adopted. Item 12, Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act. May we have staff report, please?
What you have is proposed for second reading of the ordinance that was introduced at your prior meeting, incorporating the amendments to reduce the franchise fee to the current fee of 2% and eliminating the PEG fee. So what your requested action is for a motion to adopt the ordinance, which will be effective after 30 days.
Does council have any questions for staff? No. Vice Mayor?
Yes, I do. As I stated earlier, I don't think we have anywhere near a complete understanding of the funding implications, so I'll see if I can maybe find some of that out. First of all, it was my understanding the way staff described this is if we adopt this as it's written, it can't be changed in the future, but is that accurate?
No, it's not accurate in that if you adopt the 2% now, what you had to do in time was preserve your ability to do something different than what the state law allows before the franchise expires. If later on you decide to amend this ordinance to take out the 2%, which is less than what the state allows, then by default, you will be entitled to the 5% that the state directs that they pay to the local entity in which the video provider has a state franchise. And the PEG fee in particular is specifically called out as being able to be imposed at any time by the local ordinance, by the local entity through ordinance. So a future council could decide, well, we want the 5% that the state entitles us to, so we're going to amend this ordinance and take out the 2% limit. Or we would like the PEG fee, and so we want to amend it to add the 1%.
Yeah, so the action is what's required. The percentage is something that could be changed in a future date.
Right, because there are other provisions of this ordinance that preserve your right to impose customer service standards and to regulate some of the land use issues related to installing cabling in the public right-of-way if you need to. And so those are the mandatory parts of this ordinance. The percentage is not necessarily mandatory, and the town would be entitled to 5%. Although I do want to clarify regarding the 5%, if you set it at 2%, the franchisee is only required to remit to, and by the state ordinance can have a line item passing that through, but it can only be a line item for the amount it's entitled to collect, which under your ordinance would be 2%. So for example, they couldn't impose the 5% and only give you 2%.
Right. So if I could ask for a little more clarification, I think this is a very technical item, and whether this be Steve, Bob, Amy, to try to break this down in more layman's terms, in terms of how this would impact the cable user and the non-cable user, because my understanding is, the council has made a statement prior to this that we want to encourage and enhance our cable access to the public, specifically through Channel 28, the PEG channel we're talking about, public access channel. And I would like to get some clarification. Are we limiting the funds that we will have available from the cable provider to maintain that service if we pass through a lower percentage than the state?
I think that the reasoning that was given for limiting the fee in this ordinance to the 2% is still a reasonable justification, that we know that the subscribers have to pay this because it will be passed through, and that was a part of the analysis that resulted in the 2%. However, I will point out that what you did not receive in your staff report, and I think this was based on the fact that there was a presumption on staff's part that, well, if you're entitled to 5% under the state law, why wouldn't you take that 5%? Because you do use it to provide your services to the community, and the community receives those on Channel 28 through the video provider services, so no one else is paying for that service except the people who get it. But what you didn't have in your staff report was the actual financial information, and the finance director may be able to provide that information if you're interested in having it before you actually adopt this, because that's not information that I have or am able to analyze for you. I did include in the staff report that you get about $17,000 a year from the existing franchise fee, and so that's the amount of money you have to work with to provide and that's money that goes into the general fund. The PEG fee under the state law is limited to capital improvements for support of the PEG channel. So that would be the infrastructure needed to allow access to PEG services. But the franchise fee is not limited in that way, but you do have a commitment to the Channel 28 service that you receive from the Napa TV people to pay them a certain percentage of the franchise fee that you collect, and that would be increased if you increase from 2 to 5%, so that they are willing and able to provide more services to you. They, operate the the audio-visual equipment for this council meeting, and so that it can be broadcast, and work with Granicus and offer programming options through Channel 28, and all of that would be increased by the amount of money that you're able to collect from the franchise fee if you so choose to increase it. So while I do understand that there was reasoning behind the 2% that is logical, that may have been made in the absence of the actual hard numbers that the finance director could provide you regarding what you collect and how that gets spent and how that might improve the services that are offered to the people who use cable to receive Channel 28 and or the other public access that this funds.
If I could ask one last question of town manager, the way I understand this is if we pass this at 2% and the funds don't support what we have stated as our goal of enhancing Channel 28 and providing that service to the cable subscriber, that additional funds would potentially have to come out of the general fund in order to support our digital service. And in which case, people that aren't even getting cable would be paying through their taxes to support the cable service for the cable subscribers.
Let me answer the first part the first way. The whole concept behind the franchise fee was initially put in place to allow local regulation, customer service standards, and a portion of the franchise fee has traditionally in California gone to support public access, public educational government. I will point out Yountville is one of only a handful of remaining California cities that has not enacted a 5% franchise fee, and that is the industry standard in California. And that money also goes into the general fund. Most cities then earmark that, and they use that substantially to fund their public outreach and community education, the operation of the channel. Some do it with an internal staff, some do it like we've started to do where we are hiring Channel 28. So the net effect would be right now, what this council would like us to spend in terms of community outreach and public will cost more than $17,000. We spent more than $17,000 upgrading the AV and the audiovisual equipment. My error in this whole thing is not realizing we were not at 5% when I went through the initial review and analysis, because I did not review the particular details on the franchise because of the historic use of 5%, and that's what tripped us up on this. More importantly, I do echo what the town attorney said, is the assumption on staff, this staff's part, I'll speak for myself, was that you've asked us to maximize, find a revenue stream, and to expand our services and program. So when we came to applying the DIVCA provisions to ensure that the town could maximize what state law is now going to take, because the other thing we need to point out, this is clearly an area that the state has decided that local government's not opportune enough, if you will, to manage this, and they're taking away overall local government's ability to regulate cable TV. That's the first thing everybody needs to understand, is that we're only left with a handful of little things that we can talk about under the state control, and one of them is maintaining public education, government outreach programming, and the funding structure for that. So I have to apologize not recognizing that. I had, and I think that was missed with our interim finance situation, and had I known that, we would have been able to do that. But I think more directly to the Vice Mayor's question is, clearly, if we're looking at, in our particular case, wanting to add the broadcast of the Parks and Community Services, each one of these meetings, and when you add up, that's another $5,000, $10,000 here. And if we were to apply the full franchise fee, what you're really looking at in order of magnitude is another $17,000, $18,000 that would be applied to offset the town's public outreach and communication efforts. It's an available funding structure. I understand your concerns. My obligation is to let you know that if you choose not to do something, that will have a budget impact, because that's potential revenue that isn't going to be available for some other program that you may want to use, and that's the best way I would say is, that all goes into that kitty, and you get to distribute how you want to go out.
Well, with that, Mayor, I would like to reiterate my request to continue this item to our next meeting on May 19th in order to get the input from the finance director on the impacts to our general fund and the potential tax implications of the subscriber and non-subscriber in town. So I would move that we continue this to our next meeting.
I think at this point, are there any other questions of staff? Councilmember Dutton, any questions?
No, I think as I understood town manager's recap, we're talking about a difference here of around, I don't know, 50 to 20, about $28,000, what you're talking about roughly. So I don't think we need the finance director to do all his bells and whistles for the amount of money we're talking about. As far as subscriber versus non-subscriber, that's a person's option. I mean, you're provided with cable. If you would like to go with DirecTV or another one, that's your decision.
So my understanding with this 2%, you're asking that person to not only pay for their DirecTV, but to also subsidize the cable subscriber.
It was their decision to get the DirecTV.
We have a motion on the table.
Are we going to do public comment?
Yes.
Okay.
If the motion fails.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this matter this evening? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment and bring it back to council for further discussion and/or a decision. Councilmember Chilton?
I'm going to just restate the reason that I believe that the majority of the council was wise to amend this ordinance and as it is today. We're talking about, and I completely understand and appreciate what you said, Steve, about available revenue sources. The town of Yountville has, in many ways, very few taxing authorities. And what I do reject is the linkage between Channel 28 or internet streaming or our outreach efforts and this one particular carve-out that seems to exist within state law going back in history for a long time. We made the decision to stream video on the web completely irrespective of whether we could recoup those costs from people who use it on the internet. I believe it's our responsibility to attempt to communicate and engage citizens in as many ways as possible. It's the reason we have Channel 28. It's the reason we put the ZDRB on there. Whether we put other commissions, we'll decide whether that's a cost-effective thing to do. And I think that's irrespective of whether, through law, we have one ability to go and increase a tax on our citizens. We don't have that ability if you have DirecTV or Dish Network. That's just not within our statutory ability. So this one exists. I don't believe that we should, ironically, make Channel 28 less available to people in Yountville by increasing the cost of subscribing to it another 4%. So that really is the bottom line of my objection to it, especially in an economy like this. And secondarily, considering the revenue sources that this town has, I don't think it's necessary to say we need to trade off our public outreach efforts because we've decided not to increase the tax on our citizens. So I certainly support and will make a motion after any other comments about this ordinance.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else?
I will just make a couple comments. Thank you, Mayor. First, the one piece of this item I can support is the need to act before the franchise agreement expires, and the fact that we could potentially adjust this if deemed necessary gives me some solace. I still think it makes sense to have the customers that use and benefit from the service actually pay for the service and not ask people that don't even get access to this service have to pay for it, or we have to make decisions on where to find the funding from other sources. So I think my position is fairly clear.
And I can support both the comments from Councilmember Chilton and the Vice Mayor. My concerns were the budgetary impacts at the outset, and that information we did not have at the time. And so we're talking about less than $20,000, $25,000 that the town will subsidize public access television and these various other mechanisms for communicating with our community. And I don't have a problem with that. I can support this knowing that if we get in a situation where we have to amend it, we can amend it. So we're entitled to the total, is it total 6%, 5 and 1? Or is the 1 included in the 5%?
It's 5% plus 1.
Plus 1%?
And
Okay. So we're looking at, we're foregoing 4% tip franchise fee that we're entitled to.
I'm going to make a motion to approve ordinance number 377-09, an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Yountville, amending Title V Business Taxes, Licenses, and Regulations of the Town of Yountville Municipal Code to add Chapter 5.16 regarding state video franchises operating within the town. This is the second reading, and we'll waive the reading.
I'll second.
May we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Dutton?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Dunbar?
No.
Mayor Sosserman?
No.
Councilmember Chilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Moeller?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries. Item 13, Special Events Code, Municipal Code Update. May we have a staff report, please?
Honorable Mayor and distinguished council members, the ordinance in your packet is the result of a previous policy discussion with council and a staff report based on staff review of 70 agencies. These policies and procedures for issuing special event permits, including amplified sound, still photo, filming and banner, and residential block parties. In staff research, we focused on two areas. One, review and recommended modifications to our existing special event ordinance language, and two, review and development of administrative policies and procedures to implement the updated special event ordinance language. In our review, the staff position is that we need to revise current permit application and guidelines for our current special event permit application, develop new permit applications and guidelines for residential block parties, banner and minor permits. We recommend a non-refundable permit application fee to cover the cost to the town to review and process event applications and develop appropriate conditions related to the event. 4, establishment of a security deposit fee to cover the to recover costs of town expenses incurred related to special events, rental of sites, cleanup, staff costs, and monitoring. And then 5, minor and small business event permits. Since the original report, there has been interest by the now 9 wine tasting businesses to host minor events 15 to 25 and major 25 plus. It is staff's opinion that there needs to be modifications to our special event permit process. The next part of the report basically gives you a description of the new application packages that are included in this report. Minor special business event package, application package, amplified noise, major event, block party, film photography, and temporary banners. The second part, develop new application guidelines, develop fees for the use of staff time and reviewing the application. Staff looked at how to determine this. And using the town's formula of 2.5 times the hourly wage, which is standard in the industry in terms of looking at a recovery of staff time for producing fees and charges for the use of staff to review certain policies and things like that. Planning is based on 2.5. So staff looked at that minimum requirement in terms of determining the fee. It also looked at other agencies in the valley, what they're charging. We also looked at exclusivity and expertise, and also what's unique to Yountville. And so after looking at all of those things, and staff has come up with some recommendations regarding the fees that we should charge for these. In terms of exclusivity, Yountville is a unique position in the valley in terms of hosting special events. The Veterans Home has a large picnic grounds, that areas that many groups stage from. Many of the runs and cycle events that come through town stage at the Veterans Home. The second important aspect of Yountville is that the 29 highway overpass allows people to get from one side of the valley to the other side of the valley without having to cross Highway 29 without a stop sign or a red light. It allows for continuing flow right under the highway. So that's something exclusive to Yountville that provides that we should charge for. And then Yountville's unique small town charm. People come here. It's a market-orientated factor that people come to Yountville and they want to. So many cities around the state assess a fee for that. They charge for that. Their rates are higher. Beverly Hills are quite high. Carmel are quite high. Those rates are really high when people come in and want to do a special event in those towns because of their town. So basically, when staff looked at this, we came and decided on fees. For a minor special event, we're recommending $55. For a major, $220. For amplified sound, a $25 fee. Residential block parties would be free. No charge to residents for holding a block party. So it's considered a plus for the community. It brings people together, and the town wants to encourage that. But we also want to make sure that we can regulate and provide the services for people when they want to do that, and be able to make sure that other major events aren't going on at the same time someone decides to have a residential block party. So staff has proposed and written an ordinance. Steve, do we want to read that into the record, or?
Actually, I'd like to follow up on a few things, Kenneth, at this point. One is the proposed ordinance. It will be a first reading, and I want to point out a couple things. Staff's talked about some fee concepts, and one of the things that we're proposing with the introduction of this ordinance is that one would be a new concept of the application processing fee. You'll also note in the proposed ordinance language we're recommending not identifying the fee, but as indicating as in the town of Yountville's fee resolution. The objective will be that staff is going to come back with a master fee resolution, so when you approve an enabling ordinance, that way we don't have all of our miscellaneous fees embedded in ordinances more challenging. So the ordinance that you're adopting or under consideration will reference that. I also want to point out that last year the town absorbed about an $8,000 cost, and that's being very, very conservative in terms of the staff resource allocation used to process this, because there were no fee recoveries. And I'm not talking about the local nonprofit groups. I'm talking about those that had either a for-profit venture, business-related venture. So that's a cost recovery. And again, part of this premise is part of the council's work plan to staff, which is to look at modernization of our business practices and to look at cost recovery where the town is absorbing costs that are traditionally. Again, here the applicant is the one bearing the price. Right now, all the residents of the community are, rather than the applicant, because it is borne and paid for out of a general fund allocation. And you'll see a considerable theme as we move forward in the next year based on your feedback about discussing the appropriateness of cost recovery and what it costs. So again, that is a part of what the council has asked us previously to look at. So the recommendation, and staff has also provided in the attachments a lot of the administrative process that we will be using to clean up, modernize application forms. One thing I want to point out is that in our development, we believe a nominal processing fee is reasonable because we need to look at that. And we're recommending a security deposit component because that way when we lay out conditions, we're not using this as a profit center. In other words, if an event doesn't need conditions and doesn't need additional monitoring, doesn't have a certain requirement for, say, additional porta potties, garbage, we won't put that stuff in. So what we're really trying to do is give ourselves the most flexibility to make sure that we work with the applicant, fully understand the event, and then whatever those costs are will be recovered to the town by the deposit. I will also share with you, having regulated the movie industry a lot in a previous location, if you don't get a good deposit up front and the event has left town, they don't really care whether they owe you, and in many cases they use a lot of LLCs and various other structures, and so a security deposit instrument where you have it is appropriate. And then again, our premise, and we've historically used this, is, we only will incur the reasonable cost associated directly with providing those conditions. More importantly, staff has taken to heart, and I want to commend the CSD director. We really took a look at what is the right application material, what is the right stuff, and I think you'll see that. The ordinance doesn't dictate that, but what the ordinance tells is how staff should administer the processing. So the action tonight that we're asking is for comment and direction on the proposed ordinance modifying, repealing and replacing the special events with a new ordinance, providing comment and direction related to the proposed fee structure that we've discussed some, because if you are happy with this or you have different feedback, we will incorporate that with a resolution next council meeting, specifically only to those application processing. Also, if there are any questions you may have in terms of some of the administrative focus, but we are really trying to provide that and get that and show you how we're going to be doing that with the public. And again, our objective would be all the application forms and everything will also be available online, so people will be able to do their research, find out what the information they need to be, and therefore when they come to staff, they'll be hopefully better prepared, because the biggest challenge staff faces with special events is people that don't know what it is they really want to do, and they show up on Tuesday for a Friday event, and we need to get the upper hand on that in order to properly manage that, to provide and mitigate for whatever impact those events may have on the community. The last is that we're asking you to take public comment, obviously, on the proposed ordinance 37809, and then to introduce that if you're comfortable with the language of the ordinance.
Does council have any questions?
We'll take any questions.
Council? No?
I do have just a couple. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm sorry. Are we looking at any new uses with the community center site? Do we need to think of anything in particular about that site?
This is generic, and again, a special event could occur on private property, it could occur on public property, it could occur on both. So this is not germane, if you will, to particularly the community center, but it very well could be that other people want to use the community center facility for a special event, and then it would trigger a special event and potentially whatever our rental fees, for example, if it's if it's a for-profit fundraising event. So, I mean, I would say the gamut's wide open there.
Yes, one of the conditions would be, it's on page 9. I have a check off a list of conditions, page 9 of the attachment 3. What requirements and if they had to reserve a park reservation area or facility, it would be checked and they would have to secure that reservation. And so if there's any special events like this Special Olympics, they use the Yountville Park when they have the Special Olympics here in Yountville, when they're doing their run and their walk throughout the town and Crossroads. They rent the park facility. And this makes all of that a lot clearer. So when people come in, and it makes the process easier for them. They check off the boxes in terms of what they're going to be using, and we do what's necessary to make sure it happens safely and everything else in the town. So
how does this work with, there's no difference if a business has a condition of its use to allow a certain number of permits, their charge the same fees for those permits as anybody that just walks in with a new request. Is that true?
Well, there's two categories as we're recommending, a minor and a major. So one would be looking at what that is, and there's some guidelines in the administrative direction as to the level of time. Minor events are a relatively nominal fee for processing. The major is recommended to be at about 220. So
Right, but I'm just trying to clarify that they're still required to pay those fees, even though the number of permits are already part of their condition of
that
use.
is correct, because what I would say is the town council's approval of conditional use permits has said subject to, a special event permit. So we still incur all of the time monitoring and managing the special event, making sure they have a parking plan, that they've consulted their neighbors. All of those things are time consuming and a part of what staff is doing right now without any cost recovery.
Then the last question I have is, do we need a penalty for not getting a permit? I mean, is that an issue? People all of a sudden come out and start taking photos for a magazine layout, and they haven't received a permit for that?
I mean, that you have general provisions in the municipal code for violating any section, and this section is included in there. If you undertake some kind of activity that requires a permit and you haven't gotten one, you're subject to the general administrative codes that allow enforcement of these sections. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions for staff? Councilmember Chilton?
Actually, the ordinance, this only defines special events and the large. The rest of it, as you said, is what the fees are in small events. That's not defined in this ordinance. Is that correct?
That's correct. We will be, because what
That's
you're
later.
saying.
I just want to clarify that after this.
What
just
you're
to be sure.
saying is there will be a fee, and the fee will be as is determined in the fee resolution.
Which we haven't done yet.
You have to adopt this first. Now, as we evolve, one of the goals that Finance Director and I have is we will slowly be taking out all of the embedded fees, creating that master resolution, and it also allows for us to do a more regular update and review of those fees. As Community Service Director Leary pointed out, a lot of our fees are based on an analysis of how much staff time and what's involved. And if something changes, sometimes with technology, the amount of staff time on something actually is reduced, and our fees may need to be reduced. I've seen that happen. But more likely in our particular cases, we have fees that were established maybe 5, 6, 10 years ago, and they've not been updated, and therefore we're charging something that we're not fully recovering. So that is part of our work plan that we will be working on at your request.
Are you going to have any provision at all for either your waiver or a town manager waiver or reduction in events that solely benefit the residents of Yountville and aren't really from an outside source or that type of thing?
Waiver of fees, I thought I did say something about that. I know we were
Yes, it is.
talking
It's
about that,
actually
yeah.
included. There is a fee waiver process, and it reads, if the special event is designed to be held by and on behalf of an organization, where is it?
And that also can be addressed in the resolution, setting the fees. If you want to have a process whereby, rather than pay the fee by the resolution, you establish some procedure for applying for a waiver because you're a resident, or if the application indicates that it's a resident, then the fee shall not apply, or something to that effect. You could always do that in the resolution. I don't think it's specifically spelled
No,
out
it's
in the
not. I
ordinance.
thought, what there is in here is a appeal provision, so I think
An
we
appeal provision,
we
yeah.
can, that would obviously be one of those, but I think town attorney's comment about putting in either a reduction or a waiver provision for local, and I think we have to be real clear on identifying some definitions, because a lot of people try to use that may not meet with your all's intentions, but I think we can put that in as the feedback for your fee resolution. And we have similar history. We have a program, as you know, with the community hall rental, and I think we could borrow from that and use some of those principles. Again, the staff's intent here is we process a lot of these that are not within your definition. Some of these are fundraisers, but they're being run by regional and national organizations with paid management, paid event handlers. They come through here, the fact that they do good and they raise money, but they're not what I believe your definition of a local-based community group is. So that's a good chunk of the cost, and as I would indicate to you, we only see this going up because of those locations and situations. And again, we are, if anything, late to be following what is the, a reasonable industry standard that the user pays for the cost of the resources and not the taxpayer as a whole.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I just
Councilmember
want,
Dunn?
when a person approaches, wanting an event, who is the person they would talk to first and get the forms from?
They talk with me.
Pardon?
They talk with me.
Okay.
Yes.
Because, looking at the first thing that I noticed was, boy, this is, it's like half a phone book, to read it, and obviously, hopefully you could guide them through there and say, well, maybe it's not as laborious as it looks, but it's just done for this intent because.
I looked at over 70 different cities, and some are twice as large,
Really?
and a lot larger, and some are just one page. And I tried to look at in terms of the history here with the town and its many special event permits I've processed over the years. It averages about 42 a year. And in the application, basically it's the written part, but a lot of this is to help the applicant understand the process. The detailed regulations and stuff from A to Z is to help a person read down through this. It's in alphabetical order so they can understand, what an alcohol permit is and where they have to go to get it. What a business license, if they have a business, if they're running an event and vendors are selling, it requires a business license and those kinds of things. And porta potties, where to pick them up. So all of these there would be part of the packet. So one, I don't have to explain it over again and send the information out to the people. It's right there. You read it, and if you have some questions, then you can contact me about it. But it's to help them get through the process a lot smoother.
Yeah, no, I agree. I really didn't see much of any base that wasn't covered, so.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's good.
Any more questions? It's a public hearing. Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this introduction of this ordinance this evening? Cost recovery ordinance? No one? Okay, great. Thanks. We'll close the public comment, bring it back to council for further discussion or direction. Anybody have any comments?
I'll move we introduce ordinance number 378-09, an ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Yountville repealing and replacing Chapter 8.24 Special Events to provide for a special events application fee, deposit, indemnification, and insurance.
I want to second that. I did want to make a couple of comments on, you've asked for some direction, I feel like. First of all, my biggest concern about some of the parts of the staff report have to do with the classification. The ordinance deals with large events. The classification of what a minor and small business event is, and whether we're getting the scenario that somebody wants to have, an open house. It's a business that's going to stay open for extra hours. And it's a holiday event. Whether they're now, in theory, Ranch Market does their holiday open house where they do tastings and stuff.
I think
is
that's-
that now a minor event?
That's a great clarification, and
I'm
let me
concerned
say,
about that.
that's not what we're talking about. When we included the conditional use permit where there are special events, we're really talking about where you've earmarked them. Businesses that have open houses, that's not a restriction that's in there. That's a very limited,
Well, and this is, maybe you guys can clarify this before this comes back with more. It says minor and small business events. Any event with low impact on the town that has no impact on traffic and parking. And I guess my question is, do we really need Community Services Director to be looking at issuing permits for any event with less than 200 that has no impact at all on parking and traffic in town. So I get concerned about, is Cindy going to have, 15 people over at night and it's not going to be a big deal? You're saying that's not what it is, but I would question whether it's written that way, because the word any is pretty big. So that was my only real comment.
Under the ordinance, that might not meet the definition of a special event and or require a permit. I think that maybe looking at the fee resolution and clarifying that.
Right. I agree that's not in this ordinance. My question is when that comes back
ordinance,
for
right.
fees, or if that comes back for further, because my belief is right now, a minor event, there's not a $55 fee. You guys have proposed that, and we'll come back with that in the future.
Well, and again, when we clarify that for you, it would be a minor event as defined in the special events, section 8.24, and we will.
Which we haven't done yet.
Right, so that will be clarified.
So I'll second ordinance number 378-09.
For clarification, did that include waive the reading of the entire ordinance?
Yes.
Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. That motion carries. Thank you. Item 14, consider adoption of resolution number yada, 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 for approving employee or employee relations procedures for the Yountville Employee Association. May we have a staff report?
Yes. We've talked previously a little bit about this, and I'm going to be brief. This is a relatively administrative, perfunctory process. Normally, this would have been under the consent calendar, but as we really haven't seen the proposed ordinance, or excuse me, the resolution, our definition to you is new stuff always has to come under regular items. What this item does is it provides an outline for the formal labor relations process. And the proposed resolution outlines the employee bargaining unit right, it outlines the town's rights, it outlines the employees' rights, and it's also governed by Myers-Milius-Brown, the MMB. And when staff went to look at this, we could not find where the town had previously adopted an employer relations resolution. And as we're moving into the labor negotiations process, identifying the rights of the exclusive bargaining unit and how some of those processes. So staff has worked on developing using the League of California Cities model, and we held several meetings with the representatives of the Yountville Employee Association. They provided some input from the staff's draft model, and the copy before you is jointly recommended by the parties, and with that we would recommend adoption of the resolution.
Council have any questions for staff? Vice Mayor?
I have one question on page 6, 6B, section 6B. I could use a clarification of what that paragraph means. And maybe I'm just not reading it right. About managerial and confidential employees and their representation.
It says managerial and confidential responsibility. In our organization, we may have, because of the size and classifications, people that are involved in the labor relations process that actually are assigned to the bargaining unit. And in that particular case, what they are is they're afforded the end product, but they're not involved. They can't participate in the actual meetings of the bargaining unit, because if they're doing support work for myself or the finance director, in this particular case, that's very limited, but that's what the nature of that. And it also outlines the fact that when we are identifying, as we talked earlier when you adopted the classification plan, those are also elements that the town may utilize when classifying where bargaining, which position, a job description is assigned to if there were multiple bargaining units. At the present time, the town has one bargaining unit, which consists of all employees with the exception of the department heads and myself. And that includes supervisorial, technical, professional, and line. And as we evolve, there may be some further discussion that there may need to see at some point. So that's where that language is attempted to do, is provide a basis.
Thank you.
And it also means that we just can't willy-nilly go through and put people where we want them to be without there being a logical, legal, and supportive nexus.
Any more questions?
No.
Is there anyone from the public who'd like to comment on this matter this evening?
Steve Rosa, 6468 Washington Street, number 2. Having been employee labor negotiator for many years, I think it's about time the formalization of the process has finally come to fruition. I discussed with Steve on a couple of occasions. All we started with was an MOU, and years ago we didn't have nearly as many employees as we do now. The council has always been very generous with the employees, and I think they realize that over the years. But there comes a point when we have to have this formalized document. Things have changed so much over the years, and I'm kind of surprised the employee and representatives didn't show up for this. This is a big step, and I hope they appreciate it. I hope they realize what's going on, and this is needed. This has been needed for a long time. So I really appreciate Steve's efforts, and Amy and everybody for pushing this forward. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else? All righty, we'll close the public comment, bring it back to council for further discussion and or a decision. Any comments? Any discussion?
I move that we adopt resolution number 278009, the employee-employer relations procedures for the Yountville Employee Association.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. That motion carries. Thank you. Item 15, Transportation Advisory Committee TAC appointment.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you is appointment of one representative to the Transportation Advisory Committee to replace member Sue Cole, who had to resign. We had posted a notice of vacant throughout town and the various locations and on our website. The deadline to submit applications was April 24th, and at the close of the filing period, we received 2 applications, one from Steve Rosa and the other from Liz Auer. Earlier this evening, council conducted applicant interviews. The person appointed to this, to TAC, will serve the unexpired term, which will go through October 2010. And for town council protocol, state that council makes appointment by interview and ballot process with a motion to confirm appointment. So if you could please submit your ballots for recording, I'll read them aloud and then ask for a motion to confirm.
Yeah. Councilmember Chilton?
While the town clerk tallies the ballots, there was a discussion that we had during the open session. At least the mayor said it and I heard it, maybe the only person listening. We had 2 absolutely tremendous applicants. And she made the joke about expanding the transportation committee to 6 seats because both Steve Rosa and Liz, who applied, were more than eminently qualified. So I congratulate both of them, and whoever is not selected, hopefully next time around or for a different board, they put their name in.
And, well, I would echo those comments. I would suggest that the board, the TAC board, consider perhaps amending their bylaws to include advisory positions. While not voting members, they could at least sit on the board meetings and listen in and be consulted and offer up opinion and support to some of the projects that the TAC considers.
Okay, with that said, we have Councilmember Margie Moeller. First choice was Liz Auer. Councilmember Chilton had Steve Rosa as first choice and Liz as second choice. Mayor Sosserman had Liz Auer as the first choice and Steve Rosa as the second choice. Vice Mayor Dunbar had Stephen Rosa as the first choice, Liz Auer as the second choice. And Councilmember Dutton had Steve Rosa as the first choice and Liz Auer as the second choice. And the tally shows that Councilmember Rosa received total points of 8 and Liz Auer 6. So
Councilmember Rosa?
Former councilmember.
former, sorry, former, yes.
Congratulations, Mr. Rosa and Ms. Hauer, if you're watching. I hope you'll consider sitting in on those meetings and participating as much as allowed under the bylaws, and perhaps even suggest an amendment to those bylaws.
Yeah, Mayor, I would echo Councilmember Chilton's comments. I mean, we had two extremely great people. It's not often we get that choice, and it's unfortunate. We only had the one position, but I would encourage Ms. Howard to certainly pursue further opportunities, or if something develops, as you mentioned, with the TAC committee as an advisory board, certainly look into that. It's nice to see people so qualified and willing to serve the community.
I help out, yeah, I agree. Item 16, staff informational reports. Heritage Oak Tree.
Was there a motion to appoint?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did we?
I move to appoint Stephen Rosa to the vacant TAC committee seat.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. That motion carries. Thank you. Way to go, Steve. Item 16, staff informational reports.
Briefly, I'll start on the Heritage Oak Tree, and then I'll turn it over to the council members that are on the ad hoc committee. We have been working diligently to collect information and look at understanding some different alternatives, potential alternatives to taking the tree down. There were some requests on the part of staff to get some additional information related to legal liability, which we've shared with the citizens group. And the citizens group is interested at this point. Obviously, there is a segment that would prefer to save the tree at whatever cost. There are also some citizens that have expressed an interest in wanting the path open. And there are also the residents of Hopper Creek condos, which have some interest. So the committee has been working to come up with something, and at this point, we've requested to meet with the Hopper Creek Board of Directors, meeting in June. So discussion and dialogue moves on, and it probably moves on very slowly, concerned as to how some people would like to see. But I think the effort is to be thoughtful and to look at and try to understand what might be able to happen, as well as what are the legal and risk management consequences for both the town and the Hopper Creek Condo Association and the various elements involved. With that, the Vice Mayor and Councilmember Moeller certainly can elaborate in more detail, but slow, steady communications and dialogue is what I have to report.
Well, just to give, some general specifics on our meeting, we met last Wednesday, April 22nd. There was some general conversation. We then focused the conversation on a specific option of perhaps keeping the fence up so the path is closed and trimming the tree over a period of time as recommended by the arborist. We had a great group of people. We had 5 people from the community. The arborist was there, Vice Mayor Dunbar and myself and Steve. And as Steve mentioned, we're going to be having a second meeting probably in the next couple weeks or so, and then we're going to continue our discussions with the Hopper Creek Association. So far everyone's been very open and honest and very helpful in our discussions, so we hope that we can all reach the best result.
Good. Housing element update. Excuse me, update mobile home parks.
We received the digital draft of the housing element that was submitted to HCD today, and it's going to go online along with a survey, a very short survey that allows anyone to comment on the document in its entirety. And they also included the letter. In here. This is a stamp letter from HCD, the submittal letter that it's been submitted to HCD. And they included a Program 31 that states amend the zoning ordinance to preserve the 55 and over mobile home parks with a description of, to preserve the town's stock of senior affordable housing options. The town will amend the zoning code to require the existing mobile home parks remain for residents 55 and over. So they included that as a program.
Good. Great. Excellent.
Also, I just wanted to add, I have some additional information about implementing that once it's in the housing element, if there's an interest on council's part in pursuing that. I know that AB 1111 was mentioned, and that was legislation proposed by American Canyon that was an effort to require the mobile home residency law to include provisions to give park residents and the city control over the mobile home park owners' change to rules and regulations that might affect age requirements. And unfortunately for American Canyon in particular, that has died in committee, essentially. But you have general authority, and it's confirmed by the Office of the State Attorney General, to impose land use regulations that limit senior mobile home parks to seniors 55 and over. There's a provision of planning law that says you can't have zoning that discriminates based on age. However, there is specific mobile home law that says you can regulate a senior mobile home park, and the Attorney General says that gives you the authority as a local agency to do that. So we can pursue that by an amendment to the zoning ordinance if you're interested.
And also, I had provided Steve last week with some of that specific language that the Attorney General says to put in there. So maybe you could share that all with us, too, at a later date. That should help enforce that.
What we're really looking for is if there's interest on the part of the council, general consensus, and staff will work on this and bring that back for you.
Do you want to, as a proposed ordinance amendment?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Good.
Yes. We
Yes.
want to, and with the zoning as well. Right.
And then,
It may not be next 2 weeks, but staff wanted to put that
It'll
on our
come
work
back.
plan
Yes.
so that we will proceed with that.
well, can I ask one question?
Sure.
The one other item, and this has been discussed, and I've discussed this with some of the folks in the parks, the idea of impact fees, a conversion. Obviously, these were not these parks were not approved with the idea of having family residents, and I think the idea of evaluating what we could do impact fee wise.
Well, I think we will evaluate
I'm not saying
that,
we shouldn't
but
do
I
what
will
we
say
just said.
Impact fees are a whole different category than
Yeah.
what we're talking about before, and there has to be a whole lot of legal nexus and analysis, and that changes the consequence significantly, I
Well,
think.
we can look at, because you're talking about two different concepts.
I'm
One
not
is
talking about not
right.
doing this
One
one,
is
but let's keep
one
that
is
alive.
conversion from a non-senior, from senior to non-senior, where you can impose conditions that might include impact fees, or an overlay that just requires that they be 55 and over. And if they are already at some percentage, that they have to stay that way, or if they're not, they have to get up to that percentage. And so those are, we'll bring back something that looks at both of those scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Community Center Library Project Status Report.
Briefly, in my interim duties as acting Public Works Director, you have a brief outline here that shows where the current work on, and I think what's really exciting at this point is that the project is really looking like a building. The windows are primarily in, siding is going up, and the town plaza is taking shape. And the good news is we continue to be under budget with the project, and we continue to be diligent in looking at the cost and the change orders as we process.
Good. Reference resource? What is that?
A product that the town supports with the League of California Cities is the Institute for Local Government. And the Institute for Local Government has just released, and this is a brand-new copy. It will also be available online, and we're going to be putting a link. But this particular document is written to explain to the public local agency decision-making. And it's written generically, so it will talk a little bit about cities and towns. It'll talk a little bit about special districts. It'll talk a little bit about the county. But we'll also try to explain to people the various processes, because Some of the government processes are prescribed by state law, and some are confusing. Some are designed to accomplish certain things. But this is a reference that explains how the town, in this particular case, why you make certain decisions. It talks about the range of decisions, budgeting, what's under your purview, what's a public hearing, what's public comment. So it's kind of germane, and we will also be putting, as I say, we'll have some copies available for reference, but we will be posting the link on our website. I'll be working with the town clerk to figure out the right spot for it. But it is a good reference to when somebody wants to know, why do we do some of those weird things?
Good.
Here's some help on that.
Excellent.
Mayor, before we move on, it's been brought to my attention by my trusty proofreaders that I transposed numbers on the TAC appointment. I transposed your item, and Councilmember Moeller did not select a person for her second choice, so it results in a tie, 7-7 tally for the members. If
All the more reason to appoint them both.
So
Just kidding.
had Councilmember Moeller put in a spot, it would have resulted in Steve receiving 8 and Ms. Auer receiving 7. However, it may be something that we revisit, because if you don't want to select someone, then it changes the end result of the count to where it results in a tie. So I'm just asking if council wants to reaffirm their appointment or make a different decision before we conclude this meeting.
What would it take to increase the number on the TAC board?
They would have to amend their bylaws.
You need to come back and formally amend the bylaws, and also you would need to also look at an odd number, even member body. I mean, it would require an administrative work, and technically right now you have one vacancy, so you can provide direction for us that you want us to work on bylaws and come back with you with something, but I don't know how to politely say it, but you can't appoint 2 people to one spot when the body is created by the council and currently consists of 5 people.
I don't think we need to amend our vote.
Okay.
It's a foregone
Subject to the
conclusion.
council. Okay, thank you. Just needed to bring it to your attention.
Well, my concern is if there was is there an intent not to select a second person on Councilmember Moeller's part? Because then we shouldn't assume the point value.
I I ranked them based on the points I wanted to give. So basically, we have a tie vote. Is that the bottom line?
Yes. Bottom
So,
line is it's a tie.
do we
vote.
have provisions for what we do with a tie?
Do we revote?
Well,
We'll need
we could, I think what the mayor's saying is there was 3 of us who put Steve Rosa as our top choice, and 2 of us who put Liz. So if we do a resolution to appoint Steve Rosa, presumably 3 of us are going to vote for Steve Rosa. Is that correct? That was your
That's a
presumption.
good way of putting it.
Right. And I don't think it's necessarily dependent upon the provision of the points.
The votes have
either.
never.
Right.
If I need to restate my motion to appoint Steve Rosa to the vacancy, I will do so.
I don't believe so.
Not unless the decision's opposite of what's already been decided. I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Okay, thanks.
I do have one additional informational item to share. The council's been made aware of this, but a week prior, the town received a report of a concern about some of the playground equipment at Yountville Park, and staff went up, and we have a failing platform on one of the pieces of the equipment. Upon further evaluation by myself and the Public Works crew, it's also determined that that particular piece of equipment is non-compliant with current state law, and that particular piece of equipment, the replacement parts that were required to get it compliant, one would probably actually, when we did the cost analysis, cost more than buying a new piece of equipment. So we've had to take the unfortunate course of action to we're in the process of removing the equipment because it does not meet state requirements for safety. And then as the budget process moves forward, we will be looking and working with you about our ability to replace that piece of equipment.
What piece of equipment are we talking about?
The children's playground apparatus in Yountville Park. There's
The older children
The
ones.
big
The
new
big
one with
Not
the
the new one,
work-
The older one that we didn't replace, it's the one for the older kids?
Yeah.
It's the, yeah.
Got the slides. And
Right, the with the double banana slide, the yellow ones, yeah.
Okay. All righty. Anything else?
Yes.
I back up 1 minute to the town survey that you're going to put on the website for the housing element. We're going to do any advertising for that, or people just have to like be searching around the website one day and look.
Stumble into it.
We will
Yeah.
actually issue a press release. We'll do our normal press release process, issue that to the Sun and the Register, and we will also put it on our own website that says, here's the links available, now you can take advantage of it.
is it on, it's on their website, isn't it? Is it on ours?
We can provide direction on how to get to it.
To theirs.
Right. Town clerk?
Thank you, Mayor. If I might just announce to the public that for the town's annual cleanup day on May 16th, we are adding a new component for a community shred, and that will be from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in front of Town Hall. A media release has went out. We've posted it in various locations. You can contact Town Hall for details. It's going to be a maximum of 3 bankers boxes per resident address in Yountville. Just wanted to get that word out. And then also for the H1N1 or the swine flu, I put a link on our homepage on the front of our town website to the Napa County Health website if they'd like to see any updates, if the public would like to refer to that. And I'm receiving frequent updates from the county PIO, and nothing has happened within our region. And if it does, I'll forward that media release on to council.
Good, thank you. Item 17, council reports. Flood control did meet today, and basically, we approved the funding for the Joint Zone Project 96-1, which is the district's maintenance and watershed management program, which affects all the tributaries in the valley, the Napa River and all the creeks and streams and everything. And then we adopted the resolution of intention to levy and collect the assessment fees associated with that. So, other than that, and we're very pleased to announce the fact that under the stimulus plan, we got $99+ million for the Napa County Flood Project. So we'll be making some headway on those programs with, I think it'll be completely pay for the Napa Creek restoration and flood control project, as well as the relocation of the wine train bridge, whatever that thing is. But anyway, we're making some headway. And that's all I have. NCTPA, Mr. Chilton?
We've reported on that since our last meeting.
We did?
We haven't met, we're going to meet next week, or in 2 weeks.
No, the meeting was continued, remember? It was
21st?
after the last council meeting.
Wow, I'm completely unprepared for that one, then. I was thinking it was the last one.
Okay,
I'll report on that next time. How about
next
that?
time around. Wick?
Sorry about that.
WIC met on April the 23rd.
That's right.
They're working on lots of cleanups with the creeks around the area, and they also had a booth which I helped them with at the Green Day at Napa Valley College, and that was a big success. We got lots of free little trees and plants and cookies and stuff, and a lot of people came by. And I wanted to announce that one of the other things that they are planning to do in Yountville, and I can pass this on, is this is their first ever, the Napa Valley 5K, 10K Salmon Run. It's going to be held at the picnic grounds behind the ball field up at the Yountville Veterans Home. And it has the registration information on it, and it should be a fun day for the Napa Conservatory group. And also, they were showing these really cool brown and white signs that they're putting along the creeks, along streets, and in the county. So I asked for some for Yountville. So we'll be the first municipality with signs that say Hopper Creek, and those will be coming free of charge to us. And all we have to do is get our Public Works people to pound them in the ground. So Steve knows about that, and we'll have signs that say Hopper Creek soon. That's it.
Fish and game permit.
Great, LAFCO.
LAFCO. LAFCO met yesterday at the Board of Supervisors chambers. It was my first meeting on LAFCO. It was also the first meeting for Joan Bennett, who is the other city representative. She's an alternate. Just a couple things went on. One, there was an adoption of an updated fee schedule. Sounds familiar. LAFCO is going to have a new website developed and a new electronic document management system. Exciting stuff. Probably the most interesting was a draft of the Southeast Napa County Municipal Service Review. That includes the City of American Canyon, the American Canyon Fire District, and County Service Area 3 around the Napa County Airport. That's part of LAFCO's requirements for then taking the next step of evaluating the sphere of influence for those different districts, and most importantly, the City of American Canyon's request to expand their sphere of influence to their urban limit lines. So that'll be coming down the road. And again, LAFCO meets once a month, and I've got a lot to learn. That's a quirky little agency.
It is indeed.
But important.
Yes.
One other comment. Can I make another comment?
Certainly.
The playground equipment. It's probably bad timing that it's out of service for the summer. But I think that the playground equipment is a really good opportunity for the town to potentially look to some of our service organizations. I'm not speaking on behalf of any of them, but Focus certainly does a lot of good things for kids in the community, Kiwanis, et cetera. I don't know if anybody's been to Crane Park in St. Helena, but they have a playground structure that is so much fun that I play with my kids on it because it's fun. And I think that would really be a great draw for Yountville to have something that's they seem to always get more and more spectacular on these playgrounds. So I would encourage town staff to at least have some discussions or look to the community.
So
for
you're
something like that.
interested in older kids and older kids?
Very old kids. Yes.
Probably the reason why it was broken in the first place.
I'd be more than happy to help. Yeah, that's probably what's broken. But I'd be happy to help if anybody would like a council member to assist with that.
Councilmember Dutton, you have anything?
Well, I'd just like once again to mention what Michelle did about the town cleanup on the 16th. It's always a good time to get rid of everything, and it's something that, again, it's all paid for out of a source we get from Upper Valley Waste. So it doesn't cost the town anything at this point until we run out of the money, but we're refunded for another 3 or 4 years, so we'll be okay. And then probably I can take the liberty to probably from Chris Plum to thank all of the town council, town manager, and whoever attended the Little League Baseball fundraiser at the museum. It was a nice, long evening, but everybody got through it okay, and it worked fine. So that's about all I had.
They had a great band.
Yeah, they were loud, I know.
Really a good event. Vice Mayor, you have anything?
I have 2 meetings I have attended. The first was the Association of Bay Area Governments held in San Francisco, their General Assembly last April 23rd. The primary topic of discussion was Senate Bill 375, which is the greenhouse gas emissions bill that is becoming more and more prevalent in all over the country, really. It will be eventually. But attacking greenhouse gas emissions through land use and transportation planning. We heard from Nancy McFadden, who's a senior vice president with PG&E and a former President Clinton administration member. Their focus, as we were told, is to partner with local government on energy programs, both at the commercial level and the resident level. That includes solar systems, energy audits for people to track their power usage, and a long list of programs that they went over. There was also a panel discussion on regional transportation planning, things like, this may not apply specifically here in the Valley, but high occupancy toll lanes, also their priority development areas, which they're trying to organize any future developments near transit hubs, which is critical to us because we hope to be designated as a primary conservation area in the Napa Valley so that they don't try to bring excessive development into those conservation areas and ruin the rural charm that we have here. I also opened some dialogue with our local regional Napa County PG&E representative about programs that we can implement here in Yountville, both at the business level and the resident level. The other meeting that I attended along with town manager was the North Bay League of California Cities meeting in Rohnert Park, where Senator Mark Leno was one of the two speakers. He came to speak to the importance of the May 19th special election. And then also Tony Oliveira, who is a Board of Supervisor in Kings County and also a representative for CalPERS, spoke to an issue that this council has already taken up, which is the importance of funding our employee contributions and retiree benefits. Just talking about the challenging economic climate and how important it is that we stay ahead of that. And I think this town, we've done a very good job of doing that so far. The last item that came out of that meeting was on June 3rd. They've already done their annual legislative action days, but on June 3rd, there's going to be another legislative lobby day to go talk with our legislators after the outcome of that May 19th election and what the implications would be, whether any or all of those measures pass or fail. So that could be a very interesting trip to Sacramento on the 3rd of June. So let you know how that goes.
Good. Thank you. Item 18, future agenda items, award bid for town financial software upgrades and budget process overview for fiscal year 2009-2010. And we will now adjourn this open meeting into closed session. Item 19. Does the town attorney